Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today as we're going to be talking about something that's rather important, a rather big issue, because it's something that we have seen in history, a trend that has happened over and over and over again, and I believe is happening now in the United States, but we're at the early stages. We can stop this. And we have no better reason to try than what we are seeing right now in Afghanistan with the Taliban. And I will explain that in just one moment. But first, I want to mention, if this is the first time that you are joining us today, we want to welcome you and thank you. And we want you to know that we do long-form political commentary here. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and DLive. We reach out on all the social media that we can, that the internet overlords will allow, to be able to reach you and get your chats, your tweets, your phone calls from anywhere in the world to talk about the issues that matter, the issues that are affecting us all. Because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in free speech for everyone in the world, even if you're government, even if the internet overlords disagree. So we look forward every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear you in our live stream to tell us what you think about the issues that affect us all. We hope to see you. Now for today, we want to go into, it's August 17th at 9:58 a.m. We've been watching a lot of the news and we were struck by something that's very important. Now, we won't say, it's not to say that it's not important to know that Iran is continuing to escalate on its progress towards a nuclear weapon, and the United States is very concerned. And obviously, what has been happening in Afghanistan has only encouraged Iran to continue down this path. But that's not the thing we want to talk about today. The thing that has the historical impact, back in 1965, almost 50, what would that be? 53 years ago, 56 years ago, Fidel Castro had started off with the people of Cuba promising that a socialist government that he was going to put in place would benefit everyone. It would be a utopia, that the people would be safe and free. That was in 1959. He armed 1 million people in Cuba and took over the government. Then in 1965, 6 years later, Castro went out and he decided that citizens must turn in their combat weapons, that the people could no longer be armed, and that the government would take care of them, that the government would make sure of their safety, and they don't need those firearms anymore. In fact, it was at the time that Radio Havana was saying that the reason for this were twofold. One, that the guns that the people had that had been given to them 6 years earlier, well, they were no longer necessary. The people didn't need to protect themselves. The government would take care of them. Castro and the socialist government he put in place, they would be there to protect all the people. So those guns that don't work, you don't need them. That's okay. Turn them in. And he also said at the same time that the struggle against our enemies requires a rigorous control of all combat weapons. So those firearms that don't work will be instrumental for the Soviet government that they had put in, that socialist government they had put in, to be able to defend the people, to take care of them, to allow the government, the socialist government, to protect the people. It was for their safety, to reduce crime, to make sure that they would be safe. Let me ask you, have you ever heard those kind of things before? Have you heard any politicians by chance recently who have said similar things to you? Well, what happened in Cuba? Well, after over 56 years of communist control, we see that Cuba recently People came out and they protested, something that's very rare in Cuba. Because when the people do protest, well, what we see is in this case, on July 14th, people were dead. And scores of people were disappeared. They may have died. Many reports came out that could not be confirmed, but said that people had been killed by the socialist government. We saw that people disappeared. And as this report says from BBC, we believe Amnesty International believes at least 140 Cubans either were detained or their whereabouts are completely unknown, with relatives fearing they are being held at various undisclosed locations. Quote, "They took my daughter yesterday and I have no news of her," said one woman speaking to the Agence France Presse. It's a terrifying thing. It's a scary thing. And while the left media were more than happy to say, well, this was about the pandemic, the reality is the people were screaming about their freedom. But they didn't have the freedom to defend themselves from a military that wanted to kill them. They didn't have the firearms, the ability to defend themselves from the police. No. What they have to use are improvised weapons, or if they're lucky, they're able to smuggle them in from the United States to give them some kind of measure of safety, but not enough to overthrow a government. Well, you would say to me, well, Michael, that's Cuba. It's an extreme case. That's not the norm. And I would say to you, well, then let's look at Venezuela. It's much more recent. And we see from the Christian Science Monitor that gun control. Can Venezuela regulate the flow of arms? Estimates on gun ownership in Venezuela range from 1 million to 6 million, and circulation was unregulated until last year. President Maduro recently signed a law that would create a strict gun permitting process. People got their guns permitted. That was August 7th of 2013. We're talking about, what is that? Now, 8 years ago? And at the time, President Nicolas Maduro signed a law to disarm the public. It's kind of terrifying to hear that. That they went out and they decided to take away the firearms that the people had, to take away some of their freedoms, to protect the people, to take care of them for all the crime that was going on, to reduce the crime because criminals follow the law, because the mentally disabled, the criminally mentally disabled, that they follow laws all the time. And you know that, right? So they were going to help the public by taking away those deadly, dangerous firearms. And you knew it was safe because in May of 2011, along with late President Hugo Chavez, the Presidential Disarmament Commission, or otherwise known as the CPD, was put together with a human rights activist, Pablo Fernandez, and the Minister of Justice, or then Minister of Justice, Tariq El Asyami, and 20 members of the government came together. That's right, members of the opposition, members there to protect the interests of the public. They all came together to make sure that human rights were observed and the safety of the people were ensured. That was 2013. That was followed up not long afterwards. In September, a year later, in 2014, Venezuela's Maduro launches yet another civilian disarmament plan. And we see that he went out and said, hey, we have to protect the people. Because the UN had figured that there were 53.7 murders per 100,000 inhabitants in 2012, compared to 90.4 in Honduras. And that number, that 53.7 murders, well, that's up from 47.8 in 2011. So there was nothing left for the Maduro government, the socialist communist government, to do but to create 60 new disarmament centers and to take the guns from the people. And they told the people. The socialist government said, we are building peace from within, and for that, you need disarmament. They're building peace. They're going to make people safe. And you know it's true because the BBC was carrying this and the government told you so. And then, just 6 years later, according to the PBS, 5,287 people were killed by the Venezuelan government in 2018 alone. Venezuela's government registered nearly 5,300 killings during security operations last year linked to cases of resistance to authority. The UN Human Rights Chief reported on Thursday, denouncing a shockingly high number of extrajudicial killings. Now, I don't know what is a not shockingly high number of extrajudicial roving bands of government running around and just killing people. I don't know what's extremely high. I would say one is too many, but they had over 5,000. In fact, if you were to add in the figures for 2019 onto those for 2018, then at least 7,523 killings by the government against the people because of resistance to authority. That is insane. That is an insane number. It's approaching 10,000, and that's the deaths that can be confirmed. Those are the deaths that news media were able to report. How many people were not able to be spoken to? How many people weren't counted in the news media or by the UN? Tens of thousands? And this is as people starve to death in Venezuela because of the socialist government that was there to protect them, to build peace. And there is no greater peace than when the government and its agents kill civilians. It's a very peaceful time for that civilian. And you may say to me, well, Michael, that's Venezuela. That was just about 3 years ago. It's really not that bad. That's not enough of an example. Why do you say this is a trend? How do we say that this is happening over and over again? I'll give you yet another example. Let's take a look at, well, it comes from TASS, the Russian news agency. And they stated on August 16th, yesterday, the Taliban starts collecting weapons from civilians in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Now, how do we know this? This was announced by Reuters, as reported by TASS. And they cited that the Taliban was saying, officially, quote, "We understand people kept weapons for personal safety. Now they can feel safe. We are not here to harm innocent civilians." Think about that. Why would anyone need to be armed in Afghanistan? Was it from the American soldiers who were there to protect people for 20 years? American soldiers that had the oversight of Congress and every liberal news agency watching every step they took? Or was it because of the Taliban, those so-called freedom-fighting terrorists who were willing to use suicide bombings and killed people just because it was a woman and she went to school, because she didn't cook dinner for them? Yes, there is a case where, at least allegedly, a woman was beaten down by 15 Taliban soldiers because they came to her as she was a widow, 45 years of age, and they beat her with their rifles and then firebombed her house because she didn't cook them dinner. Why would anyone need firearms to protect themselves from that? Why wouldn't they understand that this is for their personal safety? It's only to protect the people, to make sure they are safe. And if you didn't think Toss was correct, if you thought that was too much of a socialist country, well, then there's Taliban in Afghanistan capital Kabul start collecting weapons from civilians. Reported August 16th. This is the Reuters article itself. Taliban fighters in Afghan capital Kabul start collecting weapons from civilians on Monday because people no longer need them for personal protection. Because you can trust the Taliban, because they've always been honest. They didn't just kill anyone. They killed women who went to schools. They killed little girls who didn't get married. They killed LGBTQ members because that's a sin in their eyes. Because anyone who isn't exactly what they want them to be, that do not fall in line exactly as their warped view of Islam states, well, they have to die. And God forbid if you happen to be someone from a foreign country. Now you may say to me, well, Mike, I'm just not sure. Just not sure. Still not quite convinced. You may say, well, those are horrible countries. Afghanistan, Cuba, Venezuela. Those are countries that are terrible. Mind you, Cuba was highly successful. Very wealthy. It was a nation that was enjoying a huge amount of trade, and the people had a great quality of life, similar to those in Puerto Rico, one of the jewels of the Caribbean. Then socialism came in, and that fell apart. Afghanistan, while never a perfect place, while often having many civil wars and regional wars, in the 20 years that the United States was there, women went to schools. Women got to be able to have jobs and to drive cars. And now, with the Taliban returning, we have the first female mayor of a city in Afghanistan who is reported, as we have shown in an earlier report, she's waiting to die. She's waiting for the Taliban to come and kill her and her family because she has nowhere to go and no one is there to protect her. Except the very same people who are taking away all the firearms from the public. But maybe you say, well, Mike, in civilized nations, in first world nations, these things don't happen because they're there to protect the people, and democracy, freedom, reign, and people are protected. You may point to me and say, well, Mike, what about countries like Australia? That's not the same thing, is it? Well, according to the BBC in October of 2017, they asked the question, are Australia's gun laws the solution for the U.S.? Because, of course, Australia, they're a first world nation, and they got rid of their guns because of one incident, a mass shooting. And they got rid of their guns. They got rid of all the semi-automatic weapons. They took them away from the public because obviously, it was the semi-automatic weapons that were at fault. That's what killed all the people that one time. That's what was dangerous. Well, let's look at today. What's happening in Australia since that time? After the public were disarmed, after they no longer have the right and ability to defend themselves, we now see, as reported by the news media, not so much by the left. Sydney lockdown fines hiked to $3,700. That's right, they're hiking up the fines. That's $5,000 Australian. They're increasing the fines. And as news media are reporting today, 800 soldiers from the Australian military and over 1,400, actually, I believe it's 14,000 police officers are going around door to door to make sure people are locked in their homes, that they have no choice but to follow the guidelines of the government to be in solitary confinement for an indefinite amount of time yet again. And the people can't come out and protest. That would violate the lockdown. They're not allowed to do that. And they can't resist. They don't have the firearms. Only the military has it. Only the police have that. The people are restricted and their freedoms have gone along with that. Maybe you'll say, well, Mike, what about in New Zealand? New Zealand had people put in 50,000 guns after their assault weapon ban. 50,000 firearms were given up by the people of New Zealand because of one mass shooting incident. And you would say, well, Mike, that's perfectly fine. That's a great thing. 600,000 guns in Australia, over 51,000 guns in New Zealand. And today, August 17th, 2021, New Zealand has announced it's locking down the entire country because of one COVID death. One death in the pandemic was enough to lock down the entire country. And no one can complain because they can't come out and protest. That would violate the lockdown. And even if they were, they don't have the firearms. They can't defend themselves against their government or anyone else. They gave up their right to firearms. And the only ones who have it are the military and the police, who are confining the people, the entire country, into solitary confinement because one person died. Just one. Can you imagine that? Imagine if that were you. Think of almost any city in the United States. Think of almost any state in the United States. Think of the country of the United States. Imagine if there was one COVID death. And because of that, everyone was placed on lockdown. That everyone, 330 million people, were locked into their homes for an indefinite amount of time until the government said you can get out, that you are now free to possibly walk around if the government allows you to. Can you imagine that moment? Can you tell me that we're not far away from that moment now? And what's the thing that seems to be a common thread in every one of these cases of government overreach and absolutely murder of their own people? The first thing those governments did in every single one of these cases, they took away the public's ability to defend themselves. They took away the right, and then they took away the firearms so that you could not defend yourself. That's a very troubling thought. It's terrifying when you can consider that down the road, in each and every case, every single time, always because of your safety, the government has come and they take your firearms, they take your right to defend yourself. They swear that they will protect you from the crazy criminals, from the crazed, mentally deficient individuals who don't follow laws, that break the laws anyway. They're going to protect you from that. They will protect you from outsiders. They will protect you from everything. All you have to do is give them your gun. And in every single case, eventually, given enough time, the government starts to overreach its power. It locks people away, they disappear, and many of them die, usually in the thousands. And you may say, well, Mike, that's just not fair. Because Venezuela, that's a horrible country. Cuba is a horrible country. They're not shining great countries. Remember, Cuba was a successful country with a great booming economy until the socialists came in and took away the guns. Venezuela was a oil-rich leader of South America. Booming economy. Now the people are starving to death. They're trying to escape Venezuela, walking on foot over 1,000 miles to wind up in the United States desert because they don't have the ability to defend themselves. In Afghanistan, again, not the best country in the world, remarkable improvement in human rights while the United States was there. As soon as Joe Biden ran away, now those rights are in question. And speaking of Joe Biden, bringing this back to U.S. firearm owners, the lesson for you is to be very aware because we received the same kind of promise. I know everyone's forgotten about it because, well, the world has changed. So much has happened. But on July 23rd, we were reporting Joe Biden had been at a CNN town hall. He was asked about gun control. And Joe Biden made it very clear, as we read the transcript of exactly what he said on CNN to the nation. Let's hear what we had to say at that time. We want you to hear this directly. I'm the only guy that ever got passed legislation when I was a senator to make sure we eliminated assault weapons. The idea you need a weapon that can have the ability to fire 20, 30, 40, 50, 120 shots from that weapon, whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous. I'm continuing to eliminate the sale of those things, but I'm not likely to get that done near term. So he made it very clear. It's for your safety. He's there to protect you. He's going to help you. He's going to protect you from the criminals who don't follow the law. He's going to protect you from the crazed individuals that don't follow the law. Yeah. He's going to make sure that every semi-automatic firearm, which is essentially the entirety of every firearm that's made in the world today, 9mm, any kind of rifle. He wants to get rid of all of them, essentially taking away your right to a firearm. Unless you have a musket, he wants to leave you defenseless. And he has the promise. He will protect you. He will make sure that the military and the police are there to protect you. That is, to protect you from yourself, as long as you obey and do whatever the government says, because you will no longer have the ability or the right to defend yourself. Women, I want women and children to think about this. Think about this, that you would no longer be able to protect yourself from rape, because Joe Biden and the police and the military will be at every corner, in every block, in every city and town in America to protect you. Do you believe that? Because you shouldn't. There just aren't enough people to do that. But that's what he's saying. And you're worried about maybe the Taliban coming across the southern border that is wide open. And you worry about the fact that they may try to commit acts of terror in the United States now that 5,000 to 7,000 members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda have been released. And we know for a fact that the only time that these mass shootings, these terrorist mass shootings like we saw in San Bernardino, the only way they get stopped is when there is someone who is armed and stops them with another firearm. Because they will keep firing until they run out of bullets. But don't worry. Joe Biden has promised you're going to be safe because he said so. Just like he said he had a plan for Afghanistan, that it would not be like Saigon, that it would be organized and everyone would be safe. And we saw how well that went. So let me say this simply. If you're a firearm owner, and they are millions of you out there, 165 million people, 1 out of 2 people in America effectively. That includes Democrats, Libertarians, Conservatives, Republicans, and everything else under the sun. Women, children, well, not children. Although some younger people have been trained. We've seen that. We've seen 10-year-olds that can use an AR-15 that Representative Sheila Jackson Lee tells you couldn't possibly hold, even though a 10-year-old does it and is featured on CNN, as we have shown you before. We're telling you, be aware. As you go and speak with your members of Congress, whether it's in the House or the Senate or both, and you tell them to close our border, tell them at the same time, and protect our Second Amendment rights. Allow us the ability to defend ourselves. Because not only do we need to protect ourselves from ISIS and Al Qaeda and the Taliban that are looking to destroy America, not only do we have to protect ourselves from Iran as they are developing weapons and looking to fund global terror, but we need to be able to protect ourselves down the road in case, just in case, there's government overreach and they decide to tell us we no longer have any rights. And like so many other countries, the government comes to try and kill you. Don't say it can't happen, because history has shown us it always happens. It's just a matter of when. But we look forward to hearing what you have to say. If you think our sources were incorrect, if you think that they're too right-leaning, if you thought that we misunderstand, or there is a case in history where the socialist governments, the authoritarians, have taken away people's rights to a firearm and not wound up killing them, please let us know. We want to hear your voice. And we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to join us in our live stream to share your thoughts and your words.